This playlist collects together and organizes the individual component modules, which together will comprise our lecture on Goodman's new riddle of induction. Let's begin by outlining the overall plan of the lecture. As per common practice, when we have a new philosopher, I'll begin the lecture with a brief biographical sketch. We'll introduce Hume's problem of induction. Then we'll introduce Goodman's notions of inference, inference rules, and reflective equilibrium. Then we'll turn our attention to Goodman's new riddle of induction, the idea that confirmation is not something that should be universal, that there should be somehow a difference in whether or not a positive instance of a case confirms a law-like statement versus a universal generalization. We'll look at the solutions that Goodman considers to this new riddle of induction, and we'll see the refined version of the problem after he rejects each of those solutions, namely that the problem really comes down in his mind to distinguishing between projectable and non-projectable predicates. And we'll end with some further reflections on Hume, both from Goodman and from myself. Let's turn our attention then to the first part of the lecture. After that initial biographical sketch and introduction of Hume's problem of induction, we'll discuss Goodman's notions of inference, inference rules, and reflective equilibrium. Then we'll look at this new riddle of induction. Goodman will note cases, grue being an infamous example, where we have an accidental generalization that seems to get confirmation from positive instances in the same way that a law-like generalization seems to get confirmations from positive instances, and hence there is a problem with our rules for inductive confirmation via enumerative induction. The problem, as he frames it then, is distinguishing law-like statements from accidental generalizations. So let's begin. This is Nelson Goodman. He kind of looks like Joe Pesci, but he really was a Harvard philosophy professor and an art dealer. He was born August 7, 1906 in Somerville, Massachusetts. He died on November 25th, 1998 in Needham, Massachusetts. His most influential works are probably Fact, Fiction, and Forecasts and Ways of World Making. He is a post-positivist analytic philosopher to his very core, as we shall see. He's famous for his work on counterfactuals, on induction, and in aesthetics. However, his book, The Calculus of Individuals, which he published in 1940, is considered a classic 20th century contribution to mereology. Mereology being the systematic, axiomatic study of part-whole relationships, and nominalism, which is the view that there are no independently existing universals or types, but merely names, the extension of which have no ontological significance. Like Quine, Goodman sought to purge logic and mathematics, and hence, in their minds, all forms of inquiry of the reliance on sets. While Quine eventually despaired of realizing this goal, Goodman continued to believe that set theory was in fact dispensable and to contribute to efforts to try and vanquish set theory from logic and mathematics. Goodman's discussion of induction is framed in terms of Hume's classic problem of induction. Recall from the last lecture on Hume, Hume argues that we cannot know any matters of fact. Why? Because our beliefs in matters of fact are caused by, brought about by, that principle of mental connection or operation of association known as cause and effect in Hume's system. In order for us to know anything about matters of fact, we therefore would have to have knowledge of cause and effect associations. He considers whether or not it's possible for us to know cause and effect associations a priori and says no, it is not. He then says, well, is there an alternative route by which our cause and effect associations get imbued with certainty and hence can count as knowledge? He concludes that our cause and effect associations all implicitly assume a principle that the future resembles the past. And so he turns to whether or not we can know that principle, whether or not we can know that principle in the sense of it being shown to be certain. He considers whether or not it can be shown through reason and says no, considers whether or not we can establish it probabilistically and says no, considers whether or not we can establish it through appeal to secret powers and says no, and so we cannot know that principle that the future resembles the past, and so we cannot know our cause and effect associations are true, and hence we cannot know matters of fact. So Hume asks how we can make any inductive inferences having epistemic merit, given that one has no good reason to suppose that the future will resemble the past, and thus no reason to suppose that one's cause and effect associations have epistemic merit. Transposed into the contemporary context, inductive inferences are assumed to be made using enumerative induction, whereby a particular hypothesis gains confirmation in proportion to its accumulation of positive instances of its predictions. Hume's problem becomes a matter of whether or not we can in fact justify enumerative induction by establishing a justification for a principle that the future resembles the past. Goodman offers a non-standard interpretation of Hume. On page 61, he tells us, "I merely want to record a protest against the prevalent notion that the problem of justifying induction, when it is so sharply dissociated from the problem of describing how induction takes place, can fairly be called Hume's problem." On Goodman's view, then, Hume answers the question, why choose one prediction over another? Hume asserts that habit, established through experience, determines the legitimate choice. Interpreting the problem of induction as providing some objective justification for this choice propagates a misunderstanding. And so on page 62, he tells us, if the problem is to explain how we know that certain predictions will turn out to be correct, the sufficient answer is that we don't know any such thing. After introducing the problem of induction and discussing its relationship to Hume, Goodman introduces his own approach to this problem. He says, if we do not make inductive inferences based on some principle justified by knowledge we cannot possess, then how should we understand the problem of induction? Goodman suggests that the problem of induction consists in crafting an understanding of why and how inferences conform to our conventions for inductive inference. Specifically, Goodman will want to claim, as he does on page 64, a rule is amended if it yields an inference we are unwilling to accept, and an inference is rejected if it violates a rule we are unwilling to amend. The process of justification is the delicate one of making mutual adjustments between rules and accepted inferences, and in the agreement achieved lies the only justification needed for either. We'll pick that thread up in the next lecture module.